in that moment, it was a pretty big shock to me. It was a moment of realization for me that I had so neglected my wife, so ignored my wife, that something as simple as somebody helping her in a car would make her feel cared for. And I knew some things needed to change.
Hey guys, you're listening to The Glass House, hosted by Lifeway. We are Ben and Lindley Mandrell, and we have conversations with leaders who have experienced the stress of ministry and have sensed a spotlight on their personal lives. We want to encourage ministry families and provide a glimpse inside their glass house. Today on the podcast, we have Matt and Jennifer Carter, who currently lead Sagemont Church in Texas, but before that, we're at the Austin Stone Church. And for decades of ministry, have dealt with this emotion that all of us deal with called anger. Anger is inner heat. It's something we have to deal with that shows up in our lives. And I hope that you'll be challenged and edified by the conversation with them about the subject. All right. Well, Matt and Jennifer, thanks for being on the podcast with us today. We're talking about anger in the ministry. And I think anger is one of those topics that people are afraid to talk about. It's almost taboo for pastors to admit they're angry. And Matt, I heard a message you did recently on your marriage, and you described the first, 11 years of your marriage as pretty harmonious. But then there was like a moment when you realized there was some stuff under the rug that needed to be dealt with. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, Ben. I mean, Jennifer and I, for the first probably decade of our marriage, I think we got along well. We didn't fight a lot. Jennifer's not a passive person, but she's not an angry person at all. That's not really how she expresses emotion typically. She's slow to just kind of share her heart unless I'm really asking probing questions about that. But during this season of our life, I was planting a church in Austin, and I was just going for it. Guys that are pastors and church planters know that. Church plant's the kind of thing that if it doesn't work, then you don't eat. And so right. I was going as hard as I could, and obviously just working really hard. And there was a series of events that led up to it, but there was a moment in particular that caught my attention and made me realize that I was not doing what I needed to be doing as a husband, and was neglecting her. She sat me down one night, and I believe you were crying. I think maybe, I'm not sure. We were talking about it last night, trying to remember the story. But she basically said, "Matt, I want you to know that I'm not okay." And I was like, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, I'm not okay in our marriage." And that was shocking to me because there had been so little conflict and we got along. And so I'm like, what are you talking about? Because I sort of thought I was the husband of the decade up to that point. And
right. And Matt, my response would have been, what do you mean you're not okay? Like I would have been defensive immediately.
I was not, because she just isn't a complainer. And so if she's complaining, then I need to listen. And so she said something actually that really got my attention. She said, "I want you to know that I will never leave you and I'll never cheat on you. But I'm not okay." And I'm like, "All right, you got my attention. Let's go." And she began to tell a story about she was getting the kids in the car. We had little kids at the time. I don't know, they were probably 5, 3, and 1. And she was wrestling the 5-year-old and the 3-year-old and trying to get the kid in the car seat in the car. And this guy came and just helped her. I believe it was at church, and I was just not able to do that. And I was at a place in my life where I wasn't really caring for her and her needs, and that wasn't a priority in my life. And so this guy just came and helped her. He probably realized it was my wife and was just helping her and helped her get the kids in the car, and they moved on. And she sort of repeated herself and said, I want you to know I'll never leave you. I'll never cheat on you. I love Jesus too much. But she said, I just want you to be aware of how good it felt for just somebody to pay attention to me and to realize I needed help and to help me. And in that moment, it was a pretty big shock to me. And it was a moment of realization for me that I had so neglected my wife and so ignored my wife that something as simple as somebody helping her in a car would make her feel cared for. And I knew some things needed to change.
In this interview, Matt talks about the moment when Jennifer said, "I'm not okay in this ministry. I'm not leaving you. I'm not cheating on you. I'm just not okay." It made me think about, just it may be important for someone listening to just simply say, "I'm not okay. I'm really struggling."
Right. So when we moved to Nashville, there's just a real heavy grief process for us because we left something that we loved very much, even though that we knew we were called to this new ministry. And I was having a hard time dealing with it. And at that point, the listeners know that Ben and I have entered into a counseling journey. We were not there yet. And I was having a really hard time talking to anybody. I didn't know who to talk to. And so I was walking with a friend and I was giving her all the explanations of why I should be fine. I mean, our kids are healthy. We don't have any struggles in regards to health and all those type things. But I was crying still, and she said, "Do you need permission to cry?" And it just freed me so much. I mean, I just kind of let it out when she said that, because what I did need at that moment, it was just permission to cry, and for it to be okay that I had some issues that in third world countries are not problems. So I felt so silly crying about these things, but they just were so real at that time.
And that's why having a friend that you can share with, like you say, "Hey, I'm not okay right now. I just need someone to know I'm not okay." Like, just being that vulnerable with someone creates the intimacy that we long for. It's the common struggle that connects our hearts together. Mm-hmm. And I think in marriage, but also in friendship, when we're willing to get real about the fact that we're not okay, that's when God starts to do his best work.
Yeah.
Jennifer, I would love to hear from you. Just, did it take a lot of courage for you to get to that moment where you're willing to say that out loud? Had that been building?
Well, I think just to give a little bit of a backstory, we did have, those 9 or 10 years of just very, I would call it blissful ignorance. We're running side by side in ministry, and he kind of did his thing in ministry. I kind of did mine, and we would have those points of connection. But he got diagnosed with cancer at the age of 31. And for about 6 months, we didn't know if he was going to survive it. And so for those 6 months, ministry, church, everything kind of got put on the back burner. And he, I feel like those were just some of the most tender, amazing moments in our marriage, just praying together, crying together, begging God, to heal him, to just rescue him out of that. And he became very attentive to me, very attentive to the kids, because church just was not a priority. He didn't know, how long he had. And so once he kind of got the all clear, it went back to business as usual. And so we kind of went at that pace for a little bit. And then I started realizing, like, if I can have that in our marriage, like, that's what I want. I want that intimacy. I want that closeness. So I started kind of, waving my arms around saying, hey, like, let's figure out how to get that all the time. And at the time, he was like, I can be an A+, preacher or an A+ husband, but he wasn't sure how. He didn't know how to do both. And so, so I think that conversation was just one of many that I was like, listen, I'm not okay. And so, yeah, I think it was after several conversations that one got his attention. Yeah.
Let's talk about anger for a second. As everybody that's listening knows, ministry is incredibly difficult. And I've been in ministry for 27 years, and I am not being cliche when I say this, but this has been the most difficult year of my ministry, hands down, year and a half during the pandemic. Everything that we've done as a church, it upsets somebody. And so I with mask, no mask, social distancing, no social distancing, make a statement on race, don't make a statement on race. And so you're upsetting somebody. And so I have, I'm in this constant state of disappointing people. And for me, that does start brewing as anger. I get hurt, but for me, I start getting angry, and I have grown so much in this. But back in the day, it would come out, whether it was, you know, yelling at my kids or being terse with a staff member or something like that. And I just got to the place just in my walk with Jesus, I couldn't do that. And so some of the positive results of being honest about anger is that you're able to deal with those things that are affecting your heart so that you can be a better husband and a better leader. For me, I've done a couple things. I found a friend that was not on staff, that was really outside the church.
That's good.
And really pursued a relationship with this guy. And so that I could have a place where I could say anything I needed to say and talk about anything that I needed to talk about. And he wasn't connected to it because, as you guys know, I mean, you can talk to another staff person, but it affects them. You can talk to your wife, but then you're bringing work home with you. And so it's a difficult thing. So that's one thing I did. Another thing is I got into counseling. And I say that unashamedly, is that I needed to have a place where I could walk through some of the hurt and the anger and the pain. Because if we don't do that, then, and we see this all the time in pastors and leaders and pastors' wives, is that you stuff it, you don't deal with it, you become bitter and you become jaded toward the church. And then it moves beyond that. You start getting jaded towards Jesus.
That's really good. Years ago, Lindley and I heard a man talking about how, those toxic emotions that we all experience, if you don't tend to them, they become like a gopher that goes underground and just wreaks havoc inside there, but you can't see it. And I appreciate you saying that, because when Lindley and I began our counseling journey about a year ago, we realized that you cannot ignore these emotions. They are what they are. They have to be tended to. And we can't be healthy serving other people if we're not paying attention to those. But it is hard at times to admit, I'm being criticized and I'm angry about it.
Yeah.
To just come out and say that to a friend, like, I'm just really angry about it.
Yeah.
And you brought up something too I'd love to unpack a little bit more, is we've struggled at times about how much I should share with her about stuff I'm angry about at church. Like, how have you guys dealt with that? Jennifer, have you sometimes feel left out of stuff that Matt's carrying with church, or have you wanted him to be more open? What's your personality like?
Yeah, I definitely, he doesn't hide his feelings and his emotions. And, if something is upsetting him, I can tell. And so it's hard. It's been hard when there is something that he can't share, which is rare. He usually does actually share a lot with me. But yeah, I would prefer to know, just so otherwise I'm left in the dark going, am I upsetting you? Like, what's going on here?
I thought it was interesting when Matt talked about criticism being the source of his anger.
Mm-hmm.
There's never been a year that pastors have been more criticized than the last year of masks, no masks, how to address politics and race and so many issues. I heard it said once that criticism is an invitation to become angry, but you don't have to accept the invitation. I think we should talk about that a little bit. We don't always have thick skin in ministry. I can think of times when I've come home with you in pastoral ministry, and it's just I'm just all eaten up by something somebody said to me.
Right.
And it's hard to do that, particularly in a house full of kids. Don't you think it's hard at times when we've struggled with, like, how do we process out loud to one another, and how do we process this in a way that's healthy? Because we bring all that anger home.
Well, and I think for you and I, we can tend to stir each other up. Our personalities, we're a great match in some ways, but we can both be feisty. And so if Ben comes home and says something to me, instead of maybe tempering him down and saying, it's okay, let's pray about this, which is, the right Christian thing to do,
Mm-hmm.
I can say, well, I can't believe that person said that, and so then we can turn each other more heated and more angry instead of going in the healthy direction. So that, turns us very impaired in our anger.
It's tough because Scripture says a gentle answer turns away wrath.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes in ministry, it's hard to deal with criticism in a healthy way. I liked what Matt said about having a friend outside of the ministry that you can just dump all that on.
Yeah.
So you don't have to dump all of it on your spouse.
Someone were listening right now, maybe they're a pastor, a pastor's wife, they're feeling really angry with the circumstances they're in the church. Just what practical advice would you leave them with in terms of how do they deal with it? Any tips or encouragement to them?
Yeah, going back to what I said earlier, I think number one is do not keep it to yourself. It's so critical that you process through it, whether that's with a friend or whether that's with a counselor, is go talk about it with someone and get it out. And because if you don't, as we know, it festers, it grows, and it'll explode, and you'll get jaded. And I think just another real practical thing is, and I do this often, is I remind myself often of my calling. I remind myself often that, hey, it was the Lord that called me into this thing. Because when I start forgetting that it was the Lord that called me into this, I'm like, why am I doing this? This is insane. But when I remember that day where the Lord called me into the ministry, and I didn't care about anything, I didn't care about money, I didn't care about criticism, all I wanted to do was follow him. That when I remember that day, remember what I felt, remember what I prayed, remember what I said, that it allows me and helps me to endure. And so I definitely process it with somebody, and I would remember that it was the Lord that called you into this thing. God calls you in, no man can call you out.
And Jennifer, any good word to a pastor's wife out there that's just buried in anger right now about situations? What would you say to her?
I think what I've learned through ministry, and I don't know that this just applies to anger, but is just keeping your top three priorities. Number one, you're a daughter of the King. Like, that relationship with Jesus has to be first and foremost. Like, go to him with all your hurt, with all your anger, no matter what is going on, go to him. And he is the only one that will never disappoint you. Number two, your marriage, your spouse, like, he's your number two priority. Figure out how to love him the best way that you can. And just as I had to grow in being honest with what was going on, what had been, I'd been sweeping under the rug, in love, share that, help that communication, those doors of communication be open. And just continue to pursue your husband, love him well. And then number three, your kids, like, they are your first disciples. And so I think when you can keep those three, your first priorities, and the ministry and that sort of thing comes after that.
Puts it in perspective.
Yeah, it just keeps the most important things the most important things.
How old are your kids now?
My oldest is 21. He's a junior in college. My daughter is 19, and then our youngest is 16. He's a sophomore.
So you raised the kids during the church planning journey?
Yes. My middle was 4 months old, and our oldest was 2 when we planted.
So, when we were talking about the Glass House, just as far as people having opinions on how you live, on what you do, on where your kids go to school, I mean, that's just been even interesting, whether you homeschool or public school or private school, everyone has an opinion. Did you guys face anything like that as you were raising your kids, kind of living to where everyone could have an opinion on what's happening?
Yeah, a little bit. The nice thing about planting a church is that you're not walking into, some former churches, expectations. So I didn't really get that as much with school choice and stuff like that. But definitely at times, like, we always wanted our kids to know, like, this is what it looks like to be a Christian, but we didn't want them to feel this pressure, like, you're the preacher's kid, so you're going to act this way. Like, that would never come out of our mouths. But at times they would hear that from other people. And, like, that's when my mama bear would come out, like, don't put that on my kids. It's already hard enough being a preacher's kid to have to kind of be in that glass house with us, So, yeah.
We went out of our way to protect our children from that. I can only, I think there's a couple of instances, but I remember one of them where one of their Sunday school teachers, my little one was messing around like all kids do. And one of them said, "Hey, you're the pastor's kid. You can't do that." And I went, and I was nice, but I immediately challenged that. I was like, please don't say that. I don't want to put that burden on them. And the other thing that we did is we did everything we could. I mean, we went out of our way. We were super intentional about shielding them from the conflict that was going on within the church. We wanted them to have a positive experience in the church, and they can't do that if they're hearing every conflict, every staff issue. I literally talked to a guy the other day. He was 48 years old. He just became an elder of a church. And he said, Matt, I wish I hadn't have done it, because I realized how difficult it is being a pastor of a church. I'm seeing a side of a church that I've never seen before. And so now when I know that pastor's going through this conflict and that conflict, it's hard for me to listen to him preach. Well, I didn't want my children to go through that. And so we went out of our way to protect them with that. And to this day, all three of them are active in church. They love the church. And I really do think we can attribute that back to that decision.
Because our kids are all 4 teenagers at home and we have a lot of extra listening ears always, it is a hard balance of figuring out what to say in front of them, because we do believe in our marriage that we want to be real with them. And, even like this counseling journey, they know about it, but we also need to protect their hearts from being hurt in ministry or having resentment towards their parents being in ministry. And so it's a balance that we have to walk, like a tension.
We're trying to prepare them for life in the real world, and life in the real world is going to mean conflict.
Yeah, you read a book one time that had a quote in it talking about how a man who was in ministry, his children ended up straying from the ministry. Do you remember that?
Yeah, because he said that he came home every day, and in the kitchen where they could hear, he would pour out his toxicity about the saints. Mm-hmm. And he realized
to his wife, to his spouse.
To his spouse, but his kids were in earshot. And
right.
He just felt like over time that caused them to hate the church. Mm-hmm. And it caused my dad so much misery. Why would I ever want to embrace it? Let's talk about how anger can show up in the lives of kids because of ministry. We recently talked to a pastor who said, we were gone on a vacation. And of course, while on vacation, somebody in the church passes away. And my child was just angry about it. And she actually said, do people just wait till we're on vacation to die? Right. Because she was so frustrated that every one of their vacations gets interrupted by dad. His phone calls just always interrupt.
Well, I think this is the exact idea of the glass house, is that for many, many professions out there, when a coworker or a coworker's child passes away, when you come back from vacation, you deal with it, but you don't have to leave. And the couple we were talking to, that lady actually said, bad news always finds us. And so you have these plans, and that's what's hard on kids. They don't understand that. You have these plans, and they're excited to go to Disney World, and then something really tragic happens, and they can't go. And, they don't know how to process things, and we tend to, as parents, try to minimize it. And so, oh, don't be sad. We'll go next time or whatever, instead of just saying, this is really sad, and it's really hard, but we have to honor these people and what they lost.
I want to dig into your church planting story a little bit, because we really resonate with that, Matt. When you're setting out to plant a church and you get all the statistics that 90% of these things don't make it, you take it on as a personal mission that we're not going to fail, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to put food on this table. Like that's motivational in some ways, but also very unhealthy, because the church plant becomes 99% of your identity. Would you say that that's where a lot of the struggle came for you guys, or just the fear of failure driving your motivation and ambition?
There's no question. And I'm the kind of guy that I have a tendency to gravitate towards what is most urgent in my life. And so we parachute into Austin, Texas, which is a very liberal city. You talk about 90% of church plants fail. There was a study done by the Baptist Association there before we moved there, and that was really true. 9 out of 10 church plants were folding. And so I had left, we left our home. Jennifer left a job. We brought our kids. And so when I hit the ground, that was my mindset, is I am going to do everything in my power to put us in a position where we can succeed. I gravitate towards the most urgent, and Jennifer has a very strong walk with the Lord. She has just an intimate relationship with Jesus. And so I kind of looked at her and I'm like, she's good. Right? She's not going to walk away from Jesus. She's solid. We seem like we're okay. So get out of my way, girl. I'm gonna get this thing going. And wasn't realizing at the time the carnage that would cause.
We like to ask 2 questions in this podcast at the end of every podcast, and the first one that we want to ask is just, what has been the hardest part for the two of you to be in the glass house? Just people are watching your personal life, what's going on in your life. What's been the hardest part?
I would say for me, just that feeling at times of isolation and the loneliness that can come with that, especially when we're carrying heavy burdens, heavy things that are that we just can't share, whether that be in our personal life or in staff or, church family, just things that are going on that we can't really share. And we have to kind of put on that, church face, which I hate that, because I like to be vulnerable. I like to be transparent, but just some things are confidential. We're carrying them, but we can't share them. And so I think that's been probably the hardest for me.
Makes sense.
For me, I think there's been two things. Number one is betrayal. I remember older pastors when I was younger telling me that would happen, that there would be people that you pour into, you bury their granddad, you counsel them in marriage, you baptize their children, you come see them when they're in the hospital, and then something will happen and they'll just roll. And maybe they'll tell you about it, maybe they won't. And so for me, that I don't know that that's directly correlated to living in the glass house. I'm assuming you're using that as a metaphor for being a pastor and being a church. But in regards to the glass house, which is the concept of gosh, for lack of better words, you're a little bit of a celebrity in your own church in the sense that everyone knows you.
Right.
And you don't know everyone else. For me, the hardest part on that, in that particular situation, is that I simply am never able to meet everyone's expectations.
Yeah.
And I'm a people pleaser, and I don't like conflict. I can handle it, but I don't like it. It wears me out. It's an emotional drain. And so I was telling Jennifer literally last night is that, there's 2 or 3 times, sometimes more in any given week, where someone lets me know that I have let them down. And so for me, as a people pleaser, somebody that likes to succeed, for people to like them, I walk around with a constant sense of something. And this is going to sound hard, but it's true. I walk around a lot of times with a constant sense of failure.
Yeah.
And for me, learning to trust in Jesus, that I can only do what I can do, and has been a real challenge and a real hurdle for me in ministry.
That's great. I'm glad you said that out loud, because I think a lot of pastors feel that way, particularly in this season. As you mentioned earlier, that no matter what they do, there's a certain percentage of the people who are going to let them know they're making the wrong decision. And so that's really good. So the other question we love to ask folks, love to end on a high note, is, with all the cost of being in the glass house, everybody knows your life, everybody knows who knows who you are. What has been some of the rewarding parts of that for you guys? What's the joy of the ministry?
I would say it kind of follows on the heels of what the hardest part is for me. And that's, I mentioned just feeling that isolation and loneliness at times. But I think that those have been the very things that have driven just my desperation and longing and hunger for Jesus, and just to sit at his feet and to allow him to comfort me in those places that nobody else can, and to speak life into me. And so I don't know that the deep intimacy that I have with Jesus, I don't know that I would have it apart from that. Those things are what have driven me to him. And so I'm grateful for that. And I think too is just having the privilege of having that front row seat to watch God move in such powerful ways to rescue people out of darkness, to bring them into the light, and then to see those very people go out and live on mission and for his glory is pretty amazing, that we get to see and take part in that.
Excellent. Matt?
That's it. Is Jennifer and I have been doing this for 27 years, and we have gotten to see God do some amazing, miraculous things. And to me, that makes all the bad stuff worth it. that makes all the negative stuff worth it is, had I not been a pastor, then some of the richest relationships, some of the richest and most miraculous movements of God that we've gotten to see with our own eyes, we'd have missed it. And so at the end of the day, I wouldn't trade it, because it's been one of the greatest joys of my life to be a pastor of God's church.
The Glass House is a production of Lifeway Christian Resources. It's hosted by Ben and Lindley Mandrell, executive produced by Joy Allman, produced and edited by Angie Elkins, original music by Robert Elkins, and graphic design by Cameron Spooner.
Thanks for listening to The Glass House, where we hope to shed light on the dark places of ministry, one conversation at a time.